The scent of our kitchen in the morning was always the same: freshly ground blue bottle coffee, a hint of the jasmine that grew on the trellis outside, and whatever expensive citrus-scented cleaner Brenda used on the Carrara marble countertops. It was the smell of order, of success, of a life so perfectly curated it could be featured in Architectural Digest. This morning, that scent felt like a lie. I placed the folder on the island. Not a slam, not a toss. A deliberate, soundless placement, the way you'd present an exhibit in a deposition. Inside wasn't what you'd expect. No grainy photos from a cheap private eye. That's messy, emotional. I deal in data. Data is clean, incontrovertible. Brenda looked up from her iPad, a small, pleasant smile on her face. She was wearing her Lululemon yoga attire, ready for her 9:30 class at the club. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a flawless ponytail. Everything about her was flawless. That was the brand. "Morning, honey," she said, her voice smooth as cream. "Is that something for work?" "In a way," I said. My own voice was steady. Years of quarterly earnings calls and hostile board meetings had trained me to keep my pulse below 60, no matter the turbulence. It's a financial audit. I slid 2 sheets of paper from the folder and placed them side by side. One was a summary of our EZ-Pass statement for the last 6 months. The other was a categorized Amex bill. "There are some discrepancies I can't account for," I said, tapping a finger on a highlighted line. "Tolls for the George Washington Bridge, twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. You don't go into the city on those days. Your volunteer work is in Summit. Your lunches are in Millburn." I didn't look at her. I looked at the numbers. The numbers told the story. "And these?" I moved my finger to the other sheet. "A recurring charge. The Gilded Lily Bistro in Morristown. Same days, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Lunch for 2. Always the same amount, plus a generous tip." Silence. The hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator suddenly sounded like a jet engine. I could hear the faint ticking of the Patek Philippe on my wrist. Each tick was a second of my life I'd spent building this house of cards. She didn't deny it. She didn't gasp or cry or throw a fit. That would have been logical. That would have been a predictable market reaction. Instead, she slowly put her iPad down, folded her hands on the cool marble, and looked directly at me. Her expression wasn't one of guilt. It was one of patience, like a teacher waiting for a slow student to catch up. "Oh, that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The casual dismissal of it was a physical blow. "I was wondering when you'd notice." I finally met her eyes. 18 years we'd been married. I'd seen those eyes look at me with love, with annoyance, with passion, with boredom. I had never seen this look. It was a look of serene, calculated purpose. "You have a choice here, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to the register I used for final negotiations. "You can tell me what this is, or I can tell you what the data implies." She let out a small, almost pitying sigh. She stood up, walked to the espresso machine and made herself a latte, her movements unhurried and graceful. It was a power play, a demonstration of absolute control. When the milk was perfectly foamed, she returned to the island, cradling the mug in her hands. "Tom," she began, her gaze unwavering. "Look at you. Look at us. This house. The kids at Pingree. The summers in the Hamptons. It's perfect, isn't it? It's exactly the portfolio you set out to build." "Get to the point," I said. The ice was starting to crack in my voice. She took a slow sip of her latte. "The point is, the portfolio became everything. You became a machine, Tom. A beautifully efficient, incredibly successful machine for generating wealth. You come home and you're still running algorithms in your head. You look at our children and you see future assets. You look at me and you see a well-managed subsidiary. My jaw tightened. Every word was a precisely aimed dart, designed to hit the insecurities I'd buried under years of 12-hour workdays. I watched you disappearing, she continued, her voice now filled with a strange, therapeutic warmth. The man I married, the one who used to argue about philosophy and get ridiculously excited about a rare bottle of bourbon, he was gone. In his place was the managing director of the Miller Family Fund. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes boring into mine. A machine doesn't feel, Tom. It just performs. I knew words wouldn't work. I knew a vacation wouldn't work. The only way to get through to you, to reboot your system, was a shock. A system failure so profound you'd have no choice but to stop, to feel something. Anger, pain, betrayal, anything. The room started to feel small, the air thick and unbreathable. I stared at her, the pieces of her insane logic clicking into place in my head, and then she delivered the final, fatal line, the one that sealed her fate. "I did it for you, Tom," she said, her voice dripping with the sincerity of a messiah. "I sacrificed a small piece of our marriage to save your soul." For a full minute, I said nothing. My mind, the analytical engine that could process a terabyte of market data before breakfast, had just blue-screened. This wasn't just infidelity. This was an act of psychological warfare disguised as an act of love. She hadn't just cheated. She had taken my life, its work, the sacrifice, the stress, the endless grind I endured for them, and reframed it as a character flaw that she needed to correct with the most profound betrayal imaginable. The husband in me died in that moment. The shock, the pain, the heartbreak, it all receded, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. The man who had just been presented with evidence of his wife, affair, was gone. In his place sat a crisis manager. The audit was complete. The liability had been identified, and with a calm that terrified even me, I began to calculate the cost of a full and total write-down. People think a moment of clarity is a lightning bolt, a sudden emotional epiphany. They're wrong. True clarity isn't a flash. It's the low, cold hum of a supercomputer that has finished running 1 billion permutations and arrived at a single, optimal solution. As Brenda stood there, sanctimonious in her delusion, my mind wasn't reeling. It was processing. It had all started 3 months earlier with an email alert. Not from a PI, but from a piece of proprietary software I'd built myself. I called it Janus. It was an AI I designed to monitor my fund portfolio, flagging statistical improbabilities and correlations the human eye would miss. For my own amusement, and as a test of its machine learning capabilities, I fed it 6 years of our family as financial data. Everything. Mortgages, credit cards, 529 college savings plans, grocery bills. I wanted it to build a predictive model of our life, an algorithm for domestic tranquility. The alert was innocuous. Alert uncategorized spending in discretionary, B. Miller. Category exceeds 3-month moving average by 1, 8 standard deviations. My first thought wasn't suspicion. It was annoyance at the system's inefficiency. A leak. I assumed it was a forgotten subscription, a charitable donation that had accidentally been made recurring, or maybe Brenda had simply developed a new taste for expensive handbags. It was noise, not signal. But my entire career was built on the principle that there is no such thing as noise, only signals you don't yet understand. So I dug in. Not in our shared study, but in the sterile silence of my home office at 2 a.m. The only light coming from the triple monitor setup that mirrored my desk on the 54th floor of One Vanderbilt. I exported the raw data, CSV files, the building blocks of truth. I isolated Brenda's Amex charges. At first, it was a blur of Whole Foods, Neiman Marcus, gas for her Escalade, donations to the school's capital campaign, the pattern of a life of privileged suburban comfort. But Janus had flagged a pattern. I ran a simple pivot table, sorting by vendor and day of the week. There it was, a single charge, every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4.5 months. The Gilded Lily Bistro, a place I'd never heard of. It was in Morristown, a 20-minute drive in the wrong direction from her usual circuit. The amount was always consistent between 120 and 140, too much for one person, as lunch. Not enough for a shopping spree. It was a data point that didn't fit the model. It was an anomaly. My next step was to cross-reference. I pulled the EZ-Pass records, and the anomaly became a correlation. On the exact days of the bistro charges, her transponder pinged the eastbound toll for the George Washington Bridge around 1 p.m. and the westbound toll around 4 p.m. My brain started to build a hypothesis. It wasn't emotional. It was a clinical assessment of probabilities. Hypothesis A, she had a secret friend in the city she was meeting for lunch. Plausible, but why the secrecy? Brenda lived her life in the open. Her friendships were social assets to be displayed at galas and brunches. Hypothesis B, she was involved in a new charity project. Unlikely. She would have announced it at a dinner party months ago, complete with a PowerPoint presentation. Hypothesis C, she was having an affair. The probability index for this hypothesis began to climb. Still, I needed more data. An allegation without irrefutable proof is just a poor trading strategy. The Gilded Lily Bistro was my next target. I didn't go there. That would be clumsy, exposing my position before I had a clear advantage. I did a digital deep dive. Yelp reviews. Instagram geotags. The bistro was a high-end, organic chic kind of place. A favorite haunt for a certain type of wealthy, bored suburbanite. One glowing 5-star review on Google caught my eye. It was from a woman who gushed about the transcendent energy of the place, thanks in large part to her incredibly intuitive and insightful yoga instructor Julian, who often held his private mindfulness sessions with clients over lunch there. Julian, a quick search. Julian Croft. His website was a masterpiece of New Age nonsense. Photos of him in various yoga poses on a windswept beach. Testimonials about how he helped women unlock their authentic selves and realign their core energy. He wasn't just a yoga instructor. He was a life coach and spiritual guide. His services were not cheap. He was selling enlightenment to women who had everything except a purpose. He was a parasite, perfectly adapted to this ecosystem. The final piece of data wasn't from a screen. It came from observation. The following Tuesday, I told Brenda I was working from home to prep for an Asia call. I watched from my office window as she left at 11 a.m., dressed in her expensive yoga clothes. She backed the Escalade out of the driveway and turned right, towards the club. Then, at the end of our street, instead of continuing straight, she turned left, towards the highway. towards Morristown, towards Julian. The system failure was confirmed. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering everything, compiling it into the folder that now sat between us on the marble countertop. I wasn't collecting evidence to win a divorce case. I was performing the due diligence on a hostile takeover. I needed to understand the asset, the liability, and the full extent of the rot before I liquidated. I looked at her now, her face a mask of patronizing concern. She thought she was the enlightened one, the strategist who had executed a brilliant, painful maneuver for my own good. She saw herself as the compassionate CEO making a tough call. She had no idea. She wasn't the CEO. She was a flawed projection in a business model I was about to scrap. And I, the quiet analyst, the machine she so despised, was about to remind her what happens when you miscalculate the risk on my balance sheet. There. It's a misconception that Wall Street is about flamboyant risk-taking, Gordon Gekko types shouting, "Buy, buy, buy." The reality, for the ones who last, is the opposite. It's about the dispassionate removal of emotion. It's about building fortresses of logic so impenetrable that fear and greed cannot find a crack. I had spent 20 years building my fortress. It was designed to withstand market crashes, regulatory shifts, and geopolitical shocks. I never thought I'd need to deploy it in my own kitchen. Brenda's confession wasn't a bomb. It was a variable I hadn't priced in. The sheer audacity of her narrative, casting herself as the savior in a crisis of her own making, was breathtaking. She wasn't just a cheater. She was a revisionist historian. I let the silence hang, a tactic I'd learned from a mentor who specialized in negotiating with bankrupt dictators. Let the other side fill the void. They'll either talk themselves into a corner or reveal their true position. "So you see, Tom," she said, her voice softening further, taking my silence as confusion, as a sign her logic was penetrating my robotic shell. "This isn't the end. This is a beginning, a chance for us to rebuild, to find that passion again, to remember what matters." What mattered? She was talking about what mattered. I thought of my father, a civil engineer who worked 60 hours a week his entire life, pouring concrete for bridges and overpasses. He missed school plays and baseball games. On the day he retired, he handed me a passbook for a savings account. It had over $100,000 in it. "For your education," he said, "so you don't have to work with your hands." He hadn't done it to save his soul. He'd done it to build a future. I hadn't just followed in his footsteps, I'd paved them in gold. This house in Short Hills wasn't just a house. It was a statement of completion, the final project built on my father as foundation. It had 6 bedrooms, a wine cellar, and a professionally landscaped acre of land. Our daughter Emily was a junior at the Pingree School, with an early acceptance to Cornell already on the table. Our son Josh, a freshman, was the star goalie on the lacrosse team. Brenda's biggest worry in life was whether the caterer for the hospital benefit would have enough vegan options. I had built this. The long nights, the missed vacations, the chronic stress that settled in my shoulders like a lead weight, it was all capital invested in this enterprise. Miller Family Holdings, LLC. And she, the COO of Domestic Affairs, had just attempted a leveraged buyout using the company, own assets, claiming it was for the good of the CEO. "I see," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the anger or pain she was trying to elicit. I closed the folder. "Thank you for the data point. It's illuminating." Her smile faltered. This wasn't the reaction she'd modeled. She was expecting a scene. Shouting. Tears. A dramatic confrontation that would end with me, broken and vulnerable, finally ready for her help. She was prepared for an emotional storm, not a dead calm. "Tom, are you listening to me?" she asked, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "I'm trying to save us." "You are not saving us, Brenda," I said, standing up. "You're hedging. You found my work ethic, my dedication, to be a boring, low-yield investment. So you diversified your portfolio with a high-risk speculative asset named Julian. And now that the primary market has discovered your side trade, you're trying to frame it as a sophisticated arbitrage strategy." I walked to the sink and poured myself a glass of water, my back to her. I needed a moment to recalibrate. The fortress was holding, but the assault was unconventional. "This isn't about the stock market," she snapped, her voice finally losing its therapeutic cadence. "This is about our lives, our connection. I did this because you were a ghost in this house. A provider, yes. A wonderful one. But a ghost." I turned back to face her. A ghost who paid for The Exorcist, apparently. The barb hit its mark. A flash of genuine anger crossed her face before being suppressed. She was losing control of the narrative. "That's not fair," she said, her voice dropping again, reaching for the victim card. "Julian, he understands the importance of spiritual and emotional wellness. He helped me see what was missing." "I'm sure he did," I said. "His website is very convincing. Unlocking authentic selves at $300 an hour. I imagine that buys a lot of authenticity." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She hadn't realized I knew his name. It was a tactical error on her part, underestimating her opponent's level of preparation. She thought she was ambushing me with a shocking truth. She didn't realize she had walked into an ambush of her own. For the rest of that day, I was the perfect ghost. I spoke only when spoken to. I was polite, distant, and completely unreadable. I helped Josh with his geometry homework. I asked Emily about her day. I sat at the dinner table and moved food around on my plate. I was a ghost in my own life, just as she accused me of being. But this was a different kind of ghost. It wasn't the ghost of an absent husband. It was the ghost of a man who was no longer there, a specter observing the final hours of a doomed enterprise before demolition. She tried to draw me out, to force the emotional confrontation she craved. She'd touch my arm as I walked by. She'd ask me how I was feeling. It was like watching a novice trader try to manipulate the market with small, desperate buy orders. She couldn't understand that I was no longer trading on this exchange. I had already moved on. I was building a new position in a different market entirely. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I went to the guest room. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. I simply took my pillow and walked away. From the hallway, I heard a sound from our bedroom, a small, sharp sound of frustration, a glass being slammed down on a nightstand. The market, for the first time, was reacting to my moves, and I hadn't even started selling yet. The next morning, I drove into Manhattan. Not in my usual black Mercedes S-Class, but in our second car, a sensible Lexus SUV. The Mercedes was part of the uniform, a signal of success. Today, I needed anonymity. I parked in a garage on the east side and walked 10 blocks to a sleek, anonymous glass tower on Park Avenue. The lobby was a cathedral of black granite and brushed steel. There were no names on the directory. only suite numbers. This was by design. The firm of Vance, Lowell and Stern did not advertise. You didn't find them on billboards or in the yellow pages. You found them through a referral from someone who had survived a war and didn't want to talk about it. The man I was there to see, Arthur Vance, was known in certain circles on Wall Street by a single, chillingly accurate nickname, the Liquidator. You didn't hire Arthur to win a settlement. You hired him to conduct a controlled demolition of your opponent's life, leaving you with a clear title to the rubble. His office wasn't what I expected. There was no mahogany, no leather-bound books. It was starkly minimalist. A single chrome and glass desk, 2 Barcelona chairs, and a floor-to-ceiling window with a god's-eye view of the city. It looked less like a law office and more like a surgeon's consultation room. Arthur Vance was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by a patient artist. He wore a simple gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. He didn't rise when I entered. He simply gestured to the chair opposite him. "Tom," he said. His voice was quiet, gravelly. "Richard sends his regards. He said you had a balance sheet issue." Richard was my former boss, a man who had gone through a divorce so surgically precise, his ex-wife still sent him a Christmas card, unaware she'd been fleeced of 8 figures. "Something like that," I said, placing the folder on his desk. He didn't open it. He just looked at me, his eyes a pale, intelligent blue. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the absolute worst of human nature and was utterly unimpressed by it. "Before we get into the numbers," he said, "tell me what a win looks like for you." It was the most important question, and I had spent the last 36 hours refining the answer. "A win is not about money, Arthur," I began. "It's about the preservation of primary assets and the clean divestiture of a toxic one. Primary assets are my children, Emily and Josh. Their stability, their future, and my relationship with them are non-negotiable." Arthur nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "The toxic asset is my wife, Brenda. The divestiture needs to be quiet, efficient, and final. I want her removed from my life, and, to the greatest extent possible, from the daily lives of my children, without turning this into a public spectacle. I will not have my kids dragged through a war." "And the financials?" he asked. "New Jersey is an equitable distribution state. Her lawyers will argue her contributions as a homemaker and mother entitle her to 50% of the marital estate." "Her contribution," I said, my voice hardening, "has been to introduce a level of risk into the enterprise that threatens its very existence. The severance package should reflect that." For the first time, a flicker of something, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement, crossed his face. "I see. You want to rewrite the prenup after the fact." He finally opened the folder and began to read, his movements methodical. He scanned the E-ZPass logs, the credit card statements. He didn't linger. He was absorbing data, not reading a story. When he got to the printout of Julian's website, he paused. Then he looked up at me. "This is the interesting part," he said, tapping the photo of Julian in a warrior pose. "The affair itself is boilerplate. The justification, however, that's novel. It's a narcissistic defense of a very high order." "She believes it," I said. "She genuinely thinks she's my savior." "Of course she does," Arthur said, closing the folder. "People like this build narratives the way you build financial models. They are elegant, internally consistent, and bear no resemblance to reality. Her entire sense of self is invested in this narrative. That is not a weakness, Tom. It is a strategic vulnerability. It is our point of leverage. I leaned forward. So what's the plan? The standard plan is to file, serve her with papers, and begin the ugly process of discovery and negotiation. Her lawyers will paint you as a cold, absentee husband. They will use her narrative to position her as a desperate woman seeking connection. She will play the victim to her friends, to the school, to the children. It will be a war of attrition, and it will be bloody. We will likely win, but the cost will be high. He paused, letting the grim reality sink in. That's not our plan, he continued. Our plan is more elegant. For now, you do nothing. You go home. You continue to be the ghost she accuses you of being. You are quiet, you are distant, you are broken. You give her nothing to react to. You let her believe her strategy is working. You let her believe she is in complete control of the situation. Why? I asked. That feels passive. It is the opposite of passive, Arthur corrected. We are baiting a trap. Her greatest strength is her belief in her own narrative. We are going to encourage that belief. We are going to give her so much rope she builds a gallows for herself and her yogi friend. While you are playing the part of the shattered husband, my team and I will be conducting a full forensic analysis of Mr. Julian Croft. We will find out where he gets his money, where he pays his taxes, who his other clients are. People who sell enlightenment for a living rarely have clean hands. He stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. Your wife has mistaken the battlefield, Tom. She thinks this is about love, emotion, and connection. A fight she is uniquely equipped to win. We are going to make sure this fight is about something else entirely. Liability, exposure, and financial ruin. A fight she can't even begin to comprehend. I walked out of that steel and glass tower and back into the chaos of the city. The noise didn't bother me anymore. The anxiety in my chest had been replaced by a cold, hard sense of purpose. I wasn't a husband in pain anymore. I was a client. The terms of the separation had been drafted. Now it was just a matter of execution. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare, conducted in the hushed, Pottery Barn catalog perfection of our home. I became the man Brenda wanted me to be, a shell. I moved through the rooms like a phantom, my face a mask of weary resignation. When she spoke, I'd give her a one-word answer. When she tried to initiate a talk, I'd just shake my head and say, I can't, Brenda. Not yet. It was the most difficult acting job of my life. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her, to dismantle her absurd narrative with cold, hard logic. But Arthur's words echoed in my head. Let her believe she is in control. And she did. Oh, how she did. Seeing me broken filled her with a sense of triumph. It was the confirmation she needed that her radical therapy had worked. She started treating me with a condescending tenderness, the way a nurse might treat a patient recovering from a necessary but painful surgery. She would leave a cup of chamomile tea by my bedside. She would suggest I take a day off work to reconnect with myself. She even bought me a book on mindfulness. I wanted to hurl it through the Palladian window in our living room. Instead, I placed it on my nightstand and said, "Thank you. That's thoughtful." The real war, my war, was fought between midnight and 5 a.m. in the silence of the guest room. Arthur's team was feeding me a steady stream of intelligence, and it was my job to analyze it, to build the case. Julian Croft, it turned out, was less a spiritual guru and more a one-man Ponzi scheme. The investigator Arthur hired, a former FBI agent named Costello, was a bloodhound. He uncovered that Julian's wellness coaching was a front for a barely disguised investment scam. He'd gained the trust of his wealthy, spiritually hungry female clients, mostly from exclusive suburban enclaves like Short Hills, Alpine, and Greenwich, and then convinced them to invest in high-yield, socially conscious ventures, a Costa Rican eco-resort that never broke ground. A line of ethically sourced acai berry supplements that didn't exist. He'd pay off early investors with money from new ones, creating the illusion of returns. It was amateur hour, but his charisma and the trust he built with these women made it devastatingly effective. Costello's report was meticulous. It included bank statements showing transfers from at least a dozen women, including Brenda. She had given him over $75,000 over the last 6 months, money funneled from a personal account I never knew she had, funded by household cash withdrawals and returns from her shopping sprees. The bistro lunches weren't just romantic trysts, they were business meetings. She wasn't just his lover, she was his mark. This discovery changed the entire strategic landscape. This was no longer just about infidelity. Brenda had actively embezzled marital assets and funneled them into a criminal enterprise. My quiet fury solidified into something colder, harder, something akin to contempt. Meanwhile, Brenda was escalating her own campaign. She began poisoning the well, just as Arthur had predicted. She started with our closest friends, Mark and Sarah, inviting them over for dinner. I played my part, looking sullen and distracted. Tom's just been under so much pressure at work, I heard her telling Sarah in a stage whisper from the kitchen. He's completely shut down. I'm so worried he's heading for a breakdown. I'm doing everything I can to pull him back from the edge, but it's like he's a million miles away. It was brilliant, insidious, but brilliant. She wasn't telling people she had an affair. She was framing the narrative around my mental health, casting herself as the heroic, long-suffering wife. Any eventual separation would be seen as a tragic consequence of my burnout, with her as the blameless, heartbroken victim. She was establishing her public alibi. The most dangerous front, however, was the children. She started talking to them about the importance of emotional honesty and living an authentic life. She was laying the groundwork, seeding her ideology into their minds. One evening, Emily came to me in the guest room. She had that worried, earnest look that teenagers get when they are trying to navigate the complex world of adult emotions. "Mom says you're not happy," she said, hovering by the door. I put down the financial report I was reading. This was a minefield. One wrong step, and I'd lose her. "It's complicated, honey," I said, my voice gentle. "Work has been demanding." I was using Brenda's own script against her. "She says you've lost your passion for life," Emily pressed, parroting the New Age gospel, "that you only care about numbers." The insult stung, but I didn't let it show. "The numbers are what pay for this house, Em. They're what pay for Pingree and your Cornell application fees. Sometimes, to take care of the people you love, you have to focus on the numbers. It doesn't mean you don't have passion. It just means your passion is directed at providing for your family." She seemed to consider that. It was a logic she understood. It was tangible. Mom thinks you need a break. Maybe you should listen to her, she said, her loyalty clearly torn. Maybe I do, I said, giving her a weak smile. I'll think about it. After she left, the cold fury returned, hotter than before. Brenda wasn't just trying to manage our social circle. She was trying to co-opt my own children as leverage against me. She was using them as emotional pawns in her sick, self-serving game. That was the moment the last shred of sentiment I had for our 18 years of marriage evaporated. This was no longer a divorce. It was a rescue mission. I had to get my children out of her psychological blast radius before the detonation. I picked up my phone and sent a one-line email to Arthur Vance. We have what we need on Croft. Time to move to the next phase. The next phase wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a single, precisely calibrated event, designed not to create a splash, but a ripple that would grow into a tidal wave. The venue was perfect, the annual benefit gala for the St. Barnabas Hospital NICU, the crown jewel of the suburban charity circuit. Brenda was the co-chair of the event. It was her night to shine. The culmination of a year of planning, a public testament to her status as a pillar of the community. Destroying her there would be like shorting a stock on the day of its IPO. For 2 weeks leading up to the gala, I leaned into my role. I was the broken man. I let Brenda choose my tuxedo. I let her fret over my listless demeanor. I let her coach me on who to talk to and what to say. Just try to smile, Tom, she'd say, adjusting my bow tie with a look of maternal concern. For me, for the kids. Inside my fortress, the final preparations were underway. Arthur had compiled a complete dossier on Julian Croft's investment fund, identifying 3 other women in our immediate social circle who had given him substantial amounts of money. They would all be at the gala. The evening was exactly as vapid and ostentatious as I remembered. The ballroom of the Baltusrol Golf Club was a sea of sequins and black ties. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. Brenda was in her element, flitting from table to table, a goddess of social grace, accepting accolades for the beautiful event. I stood by her side, a ghost in a Tom Ford tuxedo, nodding and smiling wanly. I was her prop, the physical manifestation of the private burden she was so bravely enduring. My target was a man named David Chen. David was a senior enforcement attorney at the SEC's New York office. We weren't close friends, but we ran in the same circles. Our kids had played on the same Pee-wee soccer teams years ago. More importantly, I knew he was ambitious and had a particular loathing for the kind of small-time affinity fraud that preyed on wealthy, unsophisticated investors. I waited until the live auction was in full swing. The auctioneer was trying to whip up enthusiasm for a week-long stay in a Tuscan villa. It was the perfect moment, a lull in the social choreography when people were distracted but still mingling. I saw David near the bar, talking to another father from our town. I made my way over. "David, great to see you," I said, extending a hand. "Great event." "Tom, you too," he said, shaking my hand. "Brenda's done an amazing job, as always." "She's a force of nature," I said with a sigh that I hoped conveyed both pride and exhaustion. We made some small talk. Kids, college applications, the state of the market. Then I pivoted. "Listen, Dave," I said, lowering my voice conspiratorially, as if I were about to share a hot stock tip. "We should grab lunch." I was just talking to some of the guys at the fund about these new enforcement actions you guys are bringing against unregistered investment advisors. The ones targeting high net worth individuals in these closed networks. It's fascinating stuff. David's eyes lit up. It was his world. Oh yeah, it's a huge focus for us. These guys are like termites. They get into one of these communities, build trust, and then just hollow it out from the inside. We are building a big case right now against a guy who works the yoga and wellness circuit in Fairfield County. This was my opening. I feigned a look of sudden realization. You're kidding me. The wellness circuit. I think I just heard about a guy like that operating around here, I said, making sure my voice was just loud enough for the people nearby to overhear. Some life coach, yoga instructor type. Julian something. Croft, I think his name was. I saw a flicker of recognition in the eyes of a woman standing a few feet away. Carol Baxter. Her husband ran a major hedge fund. According to Arthur's report, she had invested $150,000 with Julian. Croft. David said his professional interest peaked. Doesn't ring a bell, but the MO is dead on. They sell spiritual fulfillment, but the product is always the same. A phantom investment with guaranteed returns. They tell their clients not to talk about it, that it's an exclusive opportunity. It makes the victims feel special, part of an inner circle. I shook my head, affecting a look of disgust. It is criminal. Preying on people's trust like that. What happens to these guys when you catch them? We freeze their assets, claw back what we can for the victims, and they usually end up doing 3 to 5 in a federal facility. We make examples of them. The only thing the commission hates more than a fraudster is a fraudster who makes us look bad by operating right under our noses. I let the conversation drift to other topics, but the damage was done. The seed had been planted. I saw Carol Baxter excuse herself, her face pale, her phone already in her hand. The name Julian Croft and the words SEC, fraud, and federal facility were now attached. They began to snake through the ballroom like a virus. I watched as Carol spoke in a hushed, urgent tone to another woman, Susan Albright. Susan was another of Julian's investors. Within 10 minutes, the entire social ecosystem of the room had been infected with a single terrifying idea. I found Brenda near the stage, accepting congratulations from the hospital president. She looked radiant, flushed with success. "It's a wonderful evening, honey," I said, kissing her on the cheek. "You should be very proud." "Thank you, Tom," she said, beaming. "I am. I feel like we really made a difference tonight." She had no idea what kind of a difference she had made. She thought she was the host of a charity gala. She didn't realize she was the guest of honor at her own public execution. The market was about to open, and her entire world was priced for a catastrophic fall. The drive home was quiet. Brenda was still buzzing from the success of the gala, recounting conversations and compliments. I offered monosyllabic responses, my mind focused on the fallout I had initiated. I felt like an explosives expert who had just set the timers and was walking calmly away from the building. There was nothing left to do but wait for the detonation. It came sooner than I expected. We had just walked into the grand 2-story foyer of our home when Brenda's phone buzzed. It was a text. She glanced at it, her triumphant smile faltering for a second. She typed a quick reply. A moment later, it buzzed again, then a third time. A small frown creased her forehead. Everything okay? I asked, my voice a carefully calibrated mix of concern and detachment. It's just Carol Baxter, she said, sounding annoyed. She's being very dramatic about something. We went into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water while she scrolled through her phone, her thumb moving furiously across the screen. The silence was punctuated by the incessant buzzing of incoming messages. The ripple was becoming a wave. "What is going on?" she finally muttered, a note of real anxiety in her voice. "Susan Albright is texting me now, asking if I spoke to a man from the SEC. She's in a complete panic." I took a slow sip of water. "The SEC, why would she ask that?" "I have no idea," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for an answer. "Did you say something to someone?" "I spoke to David Chen for a few minutes," I said truthfully. "His kids used to play soccer with Josh, remember? We were just catching up." I omitted the subject matter of our conversation. A lie of omission is cleaner, harder to disprove. Her phone rang. It was Carol Baxter. Brenda's face was a mask of irritation as she answered, stepping into the living room for privacy. "Carol, for heaven's sake, calm down," I heard her say, her voice sharp. "What on earth are you talking about?" I didn't need to hear the other side of the conversation. I could piece it together from Brenda's responses. Her voice started high and commanding, then dropped into confusion, then denial, and finally, a strangled, high-pitched fear. "No, that's ridiculous." "Who told you that?" "David Chen. Tom was just making small talk with him. An investigation. That's impossible. My Julian. Don't be absurd. He's a spiritual guide, not a—" "No. No, Carol, you're wrong." I heard the click of her heels on the hardwood floor as she paced. The predator, the master manipulator, was experiencing a sensation entirely foreign to her, the feeling of being hunted. The narrative she had so carefully constructed was being shredded in real time, not by me, but by the consequences of her own actions, amplified through the panic of her social network. She came back into the kitchen, her face ashen. The radiant co-chair of the gala was gone. In her place was a woman staring into an abyss. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw not pity or condescension in her eyes, but a flicker of pure, unadulterated suspicion. She was finally starting to see the ghost in the machine. "What exactly did you say to David Chen?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of planning. All the pieces were on the board. I walked over to the built-in desk in the corner of the kitchen, opened a drawer, and took out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. It wasn't the thin folder of evidence from before. This was the full prospectus. I placed it on the marble island between us, the same island where she had delivered her soul-saving monologue. "It's not what I said, Brenda," I said, my voice as calm and steady as if I were presenting a quarterly report. "It's what the data says." She stared at the portfolio, then back at me, her breath catching in her throat. She knew, instinctively, that this was the end game. I opened it. Inside, in neatly organized tabs, was everything. Costello's full report on Julian Croft, including his criminal record for petty fraud in California under a different name. Bank statements showing the wire transfers from her secret account. A list of all his other investors in our town. Sworn affidavits from two of his former clients in Connecticut who had lost their life savings. And on top of it all, 2 documents, freshly printed that afternoon. One was a draft of a divorce petition, citing adultery and dissipation of marital assets. The other was a settlement offer prepared by Arthur Vance. "You have two options, Brenda," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. I was no longer her husband. I was the opposing counsel. Option A, we proceed with a contested divorce. This portfolio becomes a public document. It will be submitted as evidence. The SEC will be subpoenaed. Julian's other victims will be called to testify. Your friends, Carol and Susan, will be forced to describe, under oath, how you introduced them to the man who defrauded them. Your name will be in every newspaper from the New York Post to the Short Hills Item. You will be a social pariah. You will lose everything. And I will get sole custody of the children, because no judge in this state will grant joint custody to a woman who willingly exposed her family to a con artist and embezzled funds to pay him. I let that sink in. I watched the blood drain from her face as she processed the words subpoena, testify, and sole custody. Or, I continued, sliding the settlement offer across the marble, there is option B. You sign this. It grants me the divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. It gives you the house, which, without my income, you won't be able to afford for more than 6 months. It gives you a modest, time-limited alimony package, enough to get back on your feet. It establishes a trust for the children's education that I will control exclusively. And it grants me primary physical and legal custody of Emily and Josh. You will have visitation rights every other weekend. In exchange for this, the portfolio in front of you disappears. I will not mention Julian, the money, or the fraud to anyone. You will be free to create a new narrative for your friends. You can tell them I had a breakdown. You can tell them I ran off with a younger woman. I don't care. You get to save face. I get to save my children. She stared at the papers, her body trembling. The calm, condescending savior was gone. The manipulative strategist had been outmaneuvered. The woman who wanted to shock my system was in a state of terminal shock. You planned this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The gala. David Chen. You did all of this." "You diagnosed me perfectly, Brenda," I said, meeting her horrified gaze. "I am a machine, a cold, analytical machine. You just forgot one thing." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. The machine is designed to win. There was no shouting, no final, dramatic confrontation. The war was over. She knew it. The only thing left was the unconditional surrender. She stood there in her designer gown, a relic from a life that had ceased to exist the moment I opened that portfolio, and she simply deflated. The righteous anger, the condescending pity, the serene confidence, it all bled out of her, leaving behind a hollow shell of a woman, finally face to face with a reality she couldn't manipulate. She signed the papers the next morning in Arthur Vance's sterile conference room. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak a word. Her own lawyer, a slick, overpriced shark from a firm in Roseland, had clearly read the situation and advised her to take the deal. He knew what a public spectacle would do to her. More importantly, he knew what it would do to his own reputation to be on the losing side of a battle against Arthur, the liquidator, Vance. The divorce was expedited, pushed through the courts with the quiet efficiency that only a great deal of money and the right connections can buy. True to her nature, Brenda immediately began spinning her new narrative. She told her friends that my breakdown had been worse than she feared, that I'd become cold and paranoid, and that for her own safety and sanity, she had to let me go. She was the martyr, the tragic heroine. Some of them probably even believed her. I didn't care. The narrative was her severance package. Let her have it. I sold the house in Short Hills within a month. It was a bull market for real estate, and I priced it to move. Standing in those empty, echoing rooms on the final day, I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no sadness. It was just a liquidated asset, an address. The perfect life we had there had been an illusion, a well-decorated stage for a play I hadn't realized I was acting in. The kids took it hard at first. A divorce is an earthquake, no matter how civil you try to make it. Emily was angry, confused. Josh became quiet, withdrawn. Brenda tried to play the victim with them, hinting at my cruelty and instability. But I had the advantage. I had the truth. I didn't give them the sordid details. They didn't need to know about Julian or the money. I just told them a simple, unvarnished version of reality. Your mother and I want different things from life, I explained one evening over pizza in our new, much smaller, rented townhouse in Chatham. The life we were living wasn't making either of us happy. And when parents aren't happy, that unhappiness spills over onto their kids. This is going to be better for everyone in the long run. I promise. And then, I did something I hadn't done in a decade. I stopped working at 5 p.m. I resigned from the fund. My boss was shocked, but I had made an obscene amount of money for him over the years. I walked away with a severance package that could keep my family comfortable for the rest of our lives. I took the summer off. For the first time since I was a teenager, I had nowhere to be, no quarterly report to write, no market to analyze. My new job was my children. I drove Josh to his lacrosse practices and actually stayed to watch the games. I learned the names of the other players. I learned the rules. When he made a spectacular save, I was the loudest voice in the stands. I helped Emily with her college essays, not just editing them for grammar, but talking to her about her dreams, her fears. We took a road trip, just the three of us, up the coast of New England. We ate lobster rolls at roadside shacks. We skipped rocks on the ocean. We talked about everything and nothing. Slowly, the earthquake subsided. The aftershocks lessened. My children, who had only ever known the ghost, were getting to know the man, and they seemed to like him. I was rediscovering him myself. The guy who liked bourbon and philosophy, the guy Brenda claimed to miss, had been buried, not dead. The shock of her betrayal hadn't killed him. It had, in the most brutally ironic way possible, resurrected him. I started my own small consulting firm. I took on only 3 clients. I worked from a home office, setting my own hours. The pressure was gone. The numbers were still there, but they were my tools now, not my masters. I was building a new portfolio, a life portfolio, diversified with assets that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet: time, presence, connection. Brenda, as I predicted, couldn't maintain the massive house. She sold it 6 months after I did, downsizing to a condo in a neighboring town. Her social standing crumbled. Without my income to fund her charity events and lavish lifestyle, she became irrelevant. Her friends, the ones who had listened so sympathetically to her tale of woe, slowly drifted away. Carol and Susan, having lost a small fortune thanks to her recommendation, cut her off completely. Julian Croft, I later learned from Costello, had been arrested in Florida trying to pull the same scam on a group of wealthy retirees in Palm Beach. He was, as David Chen had predicted, going to a federal facility. Brenda's name was never connected to the case. I had kept my word. I don't hate her. Hate is an emotion, an investment, and I am no longer invested in Brenda Miller. She is a delisted stock, a closed account. She was a catalyst, a toxic, destructive catalyst, but a catalyst nonetheless. Her ultimate act of manipulation, her attempt to save my soul by betraying me, backfired in the most spectacular way. She thought she was shocking the system to make me feel something. She succeeded. She made me feel a cold, clear, and absolute resolve. The resolve to tear down a beautiful lie to build a smaller, simpler truth. And for that, in a strange, detached way, I suppose I should be grateful. She conducted the most brutal audit of my life, and in doing so, she forced me to reevaluate every single one of my assets. She made me realize I was overinvested in the market and dangerously underweight in my own life. It was a painful lesson. But the returns I'm finding are priceless.